Hey folks, it's Ardwulf. Welcome. Today we have something that has arrived that I have been waiting for quite a long time. And I balked at it when it was last available because of its price. But it has been reprinted now, so we are finally going to have our hands on Rising Sun. This is the current iteration of Advanced Squad Leader in the Pacific Theater. This contains 3 full orders of battle, kind of 4 actually, including the Japanese, the Chinese, the U.S. Marines, and the early U.S. Army, which appeared in the Philippines in 1941. And we can see that this printing also contains the map and scenarios for Hell's Corner, originally published in Operation Special Edition. This is in the big 3-inch typical big ASL module MMP box, and we are going to open it up today. Very excited to get my hands on this. This means that the only module that I do not have a recent printing of, or at least mostly recent, meaning, you know, like late period MMP printing of, is Hollow Legions, which ought to be out in the next couple of months. As of this printing, I'm hearing the neighborhood of Black Friday. So let's open her up and see what this long-awaited package contains. Okay, if I didn't mention it, big 3-inch box, and it is filled to the brim. So, Rising Sun 2021 edition has a MMP contents card. This should contain 1 box and a lid, 7 8x22 ASL maps, 1 Gavutu Tanambogo map sheet. That is the HASL module that was included in the last printing of Rising Sun as well. 1 Hell's Corner map sheet, 8 counter sheets, 16 sheets of overlays, Chapter G, Chapter H, Chapter Z, 37 ASL scenarios, and 2 chapter dividers. That is a lot of stuff. This also updates, other than the Italians, once again, my ASL rules. So here we have in the standard ASL format. So let's do our MMP style unboxing and take everything out of the box one at a time until we have everything, and then we'll go through it all. So here's our Chapter G Pacific Theater rules with a blank page at the end. Here's a counter sheet. Counters are on the standard MMP ASL brown core stuff. Here is Chapter Z, Sand and Blood, which is Gavutu and Tanambogo. Here's another blank sheet, which we'll set aside for now. Here is a map board. Here is another counter sheet. Here is Sand and Blood, Gavutu, Tanambogo. So we'll look at this with the maps. Here's another map. Here's another counter sheet. Here's our giant wad of scenarios. We'll go through those as well, as we usually do with these unboxings. Here's another blank piece of paper. Here is one of the chapter dividers. This is a new ASL National Capabilities chart. Is this for Chapter G? What is this, Chapter G specifically? I think it is. Yeah, I guess it is, because this is not the full up-to-date National Capabilities chart. Yeah, this is the PTO chart. All right, so let's set that aside for now. I'm running out of space here. Here's another map. Here's the Hell's Corner map. Hell's Corner is somewhere on Guadalcanal, I can tell you that. Here is the Hell's Corner rules. Battles along the Matanacao River, Guadalcanal, which includes more scenarios. Let's set that there. The blank pieces of paper are out of control here. Another map. Actually, the volume of contents is out of control here. There's a lot of stuff here. Like a crazy amount of stuff. Here's the overlays. I am off the hook here. Here is more blank pages. Here's H Chinese vehicle notes. Chinese DYO charts. More counters. More counters. These would be the Japanese. More map. Here's another chapter divider. More counters. Another map. Japanese vehicle notes. Just organizing this thing is going to take me an eon. I'm already way behind on ASL stuff. And then here's 4 whole sheets of overlays for ocean. So, all right. So, I think we've seen the rules here. We got the Chinese-Japanese vehicle notes, we got the HASL stuff, and we have the PTO Pacific rules chapter. So right now we're going to just put that back in the box. And then we have Hell's Corner, which I'm having trouble with. Okay, that doesn't belong there. So let's take a look first at the boards, I guess. Well, let's take a first look at the overlays. So we got the 4 sheets of C overlays. The rest of them look pretty standard. There's a big jungled hill. I think these are rice paddies. That might be accurate. I have never played Pacific ASL. So, and there are special unique terrain types in Pacific ASL that I may not be necessarily able to identify. A lot of these, maybe these are rice paddies. I don't know. Here's a river of some kind. Here's some little rivered ravines or something like that. So a whole bunch of overlays. If I haven't said this already, and I have, the volume of stuff in here is just nuts. All right, so we have the boards. So this is board 34, heavily jungled with some ravines and a couple of roads. There's board 35 with some wheat fields, a lot of orchard and some little lakes. It's also an interesting board. Here's board number 36 with some jungled hills. These are woods if they are in the ETO, and jungle if they are in the PTO. Or at least parts of the PTO anyway. Looks like mostly woods and fields and orchards. Woods and fields, some orchards. Look at that. So this is, I'm just going to wildly guess here that there is at least one scenario where this represents Henderson Field. That is my guess at this time. Here is a wooded hill, but instead of 4 little wooded hills, there's one huge wooded hill. That would be very interesting to fight on. Here is swamp, maybe? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that is. Not exactly the most up-to-date person on the subject of ASL either. All right, so Gavutu Tanambogo is a small island, or 2 islands really, that was fought over. I don't know a lot about this engagement, but we have this scenario map for the campaign. It looks like it is an 10 or 11 turn game. If you want like a really small taste of maybe the Blood Reef Tarawa experience, this might be the way to go. And of course, like I said, this particular campaign did appear in the last printing of Rising Sun, and it originally came from somewhere too, as does Hell's Corner. Like I said, it's from an operations or special operations magazine. Now this is a full-size map, more or less, unlike the previous one. And this is a big section of both jungle and some coastline. And I want to show you the coastline because it's neat. Here is, and my table positioning is exceptionally poor for this, but I'm going to show you. The map adjoins the coast of Guadalcanal, and here's Iron Bottom Sound. That is pretty cool. So, looks like we're going to have fun getting into this. All right, so we have here Chinese troops in their sort of half-baked colors. We have, I'm not sure I've seen these particular markers before, but Chinese vehicles, Japanese vehicles, Japanese single-man counters, leaders, concealments. Here's the Japanese support weapons, some more Chinese, some markers. Some of these, once again, I'm not sure what they are. The bonsai markers, I know what that is. Here's USMC and early U.S. Army. I actually have a separate tray for the U.S. Pacific Theater troops. And a whole bunch of these. And again, this is on a, I'd say medium to heavyweight brown core stock on these counters. Looks like there might have been a little bump here, but once they're punched, nobody will notice such unpleasantness. So it's all good. So let's finally take a look, put this chapter divider back in, and take a look at the enormous pile of scenarios, starting with Hell's Corner. So here we can see the Hell's Corner map, and we have what is probably going to turn into 5 or 6 different scenarios. Minimal special rules on this, which is also something that makes it pretty attractive. First, Matanikau. This is Matanikau Village, 18 August 1942. This is all going to be U.S. versus Japanese. U.S. Marines, in all likelihood, versus Japanese. Definitely the case here, yes. Bailey's Demise. Samurai Sunset. Wailing Good Time. And The Sand Spit. Okay, and these are all in the neighborhood of October 1942. August to October 1942 anyway. And they're all on that map, right? Which is part of Guadalcanal. Good chunk of Guadalcanal at that. I mean, it ain't the whole island. This might be the fattest single stack of scenarios I've seen in an ASL product. I could be wrong about that. All right, so here we have Smrtniki. This takes place in 1945 in Manchukuo between the Japanese and the Soviets. That itself makes it fairly interesting. There was action there, as we can see, but it is not a part of World War II that has gotten tons of attention. On the Kokoda Trail, this looks like we have miscellaneous allies, possibly Dutch East Indies troops, maybe, or Australians. I'd have to look into this more. Papua New Guinea, 9 August 1942. Shoestring Ridge. This is Leyte, Philippines, which probably makes it late war. Yep, 44. Americans versus Japanese. Bungle in the Jungle, Burma, 1942. Japanese versus British. Here's the back half of the Shoestring Ridge scenario. And here's the Eastern Gate, Japanese versus British. Hazardous Occupation. Muslim guerrillas in the Philippines, 1942. Very interesting. Very interesting. Lots of folks don't like these guerrilla and or partisan scenarios. I'm probably one of those people. Here's another Japanese versus Soviets, this time in 1939. This is Nomonhan, actually. So this is part of that little quasi-war that was fought in 1939 between the Japanese and the Soviets. Very interesting to see a scenario on that. And here's the back half of that. A lot of these roll over. The Bushmasters. This is Netherlands, New Guinea. May 1944. Japanese versus Americans. The back half of the book, Bushmasters. Sibix Ridge, November 1943, Americans versus Japanese. The Rock, Corregidor, Philippines, 6 May 1942, Americans and Japanese, obviously. Very interesting. Looks like that is a 2-mapper with some overlays. Today We Attack, Burma 1942, Japanese versus Chinese. Wow, that's a big scenario. 26 of these 447 Chinese squads, plus some extras. Looks like some half squads, some vehicles. This is a big scenario. More Corregidor. KP-167. Bataan, 1942. Japanese versus Americans. Very interesting. KP-167 again. Jungle Citadel. Burma, 1944. Japanese versus Chinese. As you can see, we have some... This is also a big scenario. We have some better Chinese troops. Chinese elite troops, which are, better, versus a decent number of what looks like dug-in Japanese. This actually looks pretty interesting, too. I'm going to guess and say this is probably a pretty long scenario. So a lot of these, like, old-school ASL scenarios, and I don't mean squad leader scenarios, I mean ASL scenarios. I mean scenarios that were released in the original run of Avalon Hill modules. A lot of these tend to be fairly long scenarios. And I think that is probably one. Sea of Tranquility, Pelelu, 1944, Japanese versus Americans. MacArthur's Folly. Hell or High Water, Bougainville, 1943, Japanese versus Americans. More Hell or High Water. Bloody Red Beach, Guam, 1944. Very interesting. Looks like we have some amphibious landings here. Not that many scenarios that feature that, and people hate those. A lot of people, anyway, don't like to deal with the amphibious landing or air landing rules. It's another thing I've never played, so I don't really have an opinion. Shanghai in Flames, Shanghai 1937. Another fairly decent-sized scenario. More on that. You could see the amount of like scenario overflow you have on these is more than in any other module. The drive for Taizhuang. I am probably not pronouncing that effectively. 1938, Japanese versus Chinese. A Stiff Fight, Malaya, 1941, British versus Japanese. Ramsey's Charge, you can see we have a lot of scenarios here. Japanese versus Americans, Morong, the Philippines, 1942, early 1942. Grabbing Gavutu. This is on the Gavutu map, actually, very interesting. So they've integrated the scenarios into the mix with these, but not the Hell's Corner ones, presumably because those are newly added. You can see that only part of that map is in play. Here's another Gavutu scenario, Tanambogo Nightmare. Looks like this is Tanambogo, the other one's Gavutu, but here's Take Two. Here's Munda Mash. 1943, New Georgia, Japanese versus Americans. Burma 1944, Chinese versus Japanese. Orange at Wallabum, Burma, Americans versus Japanese in 1944. Smith and Weston, Burma 1944, Americans and Japanese. Broken Bamboo, Burma 1944, Japanese and British. Op Hill, Burma 1944, Japanese and British. Last of Their Strength, Burma 1944, Japanese and Americans. Pretty big scenario board-wise, and not incredibly tiny counter-wise either. White Tigers, India, where we are not going to be trying to pronounce that. 1944, Japanese versus British. Battlin' Buckeyes. This originally appeared, I think, in an ASL journal. It is now ASL Scenario 160. This is from whatever division this was. That is the basically Ohio division that did fight in the Pacific. Luzon in the Philippines, January 1945. And again, Japanese versus Americans. And here's the Sand and Blood Gavutu Tanambogo Campaign Order of Battle, which is pretty big, as you can see. 5 squads and 2 crews, 26 squads, 14 squads. There's a lot of squads here. A lot of guys packed onto those tiny little islands. Okay, so big unboxing of a whole pile of additional ASL stuff. A game that I am already severely backed up on. Organization has arrived. And, I better get on this because it's not going to be too much longer, but, by the time next month is out, I might have my hands on Hollow Legions as well. So we really probably need to get organizing on the Rising Sun front. In the meantime, here we go. So hopefully you found this informative or useful. If so, please do give it a thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to help support Ardwulf's Lair, please do check out the links in the video description to the Patreon, the merch store, and the Ko-Fi. Until next time, thanks again for watching and happy wargaming.